All right, so this is chapter 22, lesson 3. And what we're going to be talking about in chapter 22, lesson 3 is ecological succession. So this is the information that you should use to help you build your stop motion video that you're going to be creating. So ecological succession is the gradual change of one community into another. So what that means is that we're changing what the community is made up of. So like, the plants and the animals and things that live there to start with, and we're turning it into a different community with different plants and different animals and things that live there. As ecological succession happens, it's going to go through a series of real predictable steps. So there are steps to this process of ecological succession. Okay, and we're going to be walking through the steps of ecological succession in 3 different types of ecological succession. This process is going to end when the community becomes what we call a climax community. So no more succession takes place after we reach this climax community level. And what a climax community is a community that no longer goes through major ecological changes. So it's like super stable. It's not changing. There's no more succession happening. It's the end of this change from one community to another. So this is when we've become a whole different community that's real stable and not changing at all. Now, like I said, we're going to be talking about 3 different types of succession. And these 3 types of succession are what you are going to be basing your videos on. So the first type of succession is called primary succession. So primary succession is going to happen in a new area of land. So there's little or no soil in this area. Areas that this might be would be like a lava flow or a sand dune or some sort of exposed rock. So there's no soil there. And because there's no soil, that means there's nothing really growing there either. So as we talk through this primary succession, we're going to go through the steps that happen in primary succession. And you can see those down at the bottom of the slide here also, so you can see what we're talking about and how it moves through. So the very first thing that's going to happen is that you are going to have something called a pioneer species. So pioneer species are things like lichens and mosses and things like that don't really have roots that have to burrow into soil. They can grow in pretty much as little soil as you can imagine. So what happens is these lichen and moss spores, or like their seeds, are going to blow in or get carried in and settle on this exposed rock. So the lava flow or the sand dune or the rock. So somewhere where there's no soil. And they're going to start to grow there. And as they grow, lichens are going to release a little bit of acid, which helps break down rock. They're also going to they're going to start dying and decaying. And so as we break down this rock, we're going to form a little bit of soil. And then nutrients get added to the soil as the lichens and mosses die and then decay. So it's going through those nutrient cycles that we talked about a couple chapters ago, like the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle and the oxygen cycle and the water cycle. So these nutrients then, as these lichens and mosses die, they're going to decay, and these nutrients then will be added to that little bit of soil. Now remember, we said before that plants have to have nutrients in the soil for them to be able to grow in the soil. So these are our pioneer species, lichens, mosses, things like that. So they're the very first ones to settle in an area. The next group that are going to come are going to be ferns and other small plants. So these are things that aren't going to have roots that go very deep into the soil. So they're going to start to grow in this little bit of soil that the lichens and mosses made. Well, as more ferns and more other small plants start to grow, the lichens and mosses kind of get pushed out. There's not enough room for them. There's not enough nutrients, not enough habitat, not enough sunshine, all of those kinds of things. So they don't have enough resources, so they start to disappear. So they're moving out of the community. As the ferns and these other small plants die, they're going to add to the soil as well. The other thing that they do is with their roots, they can cause the rocks to break up a little bit more, also creating more of this soil. So at this point, we are in this second step here of primary succession. Okay, so the third step is when the soil gets to be thick enough to hold water. Once the soil is thick enough to hold some water, then things like grasses and other perennials like wildflowers and weeds and things like that are going to be able to start to grow. And again, their roots are going to break up those rocks a little bit more. When they die and decay, they're going to add more nutrients. So that soil is just going to keep getting thicker and deeper and more nutrient rich and better able to provide resources, I guess, for bigger plants. So now we've got grasses growing here, perennials like your wildflowers and things like that. As those things have moved in, now the ferns and the other little plants, along with the lichens and mosses, are going to be pushed out. So they're not going to be there anymore, or very few are going to be there. So now we've got some soil that's able to hold water. It's getting thicker. We've got these grasses that are growing, making even more soil and making the soil better. And what's going to happen is we're going to end up then with taller plants and shrubs growing. So that would be like here. So we've got grasses, shrubs, and shade intolerant trees like pines and things like that. So we've got these taller plants and shrubs that are growing. They're going to shade the grasses. The grasses are going to start to disappear. So again, we're still adding more soil, making that soil more nutrient rich, a little bit thicker, a little bit deeper. So then, after we've got these grasses and shrubs in this section, then we're going to have more of these shallow-rooted trees. So we're going to be in about this area of this process. So pines and shallow-rooted trees are going to move in, and they're going to start shading those taller plants and those shrubs, and the taller plants and the shrubs are going to start to disappear. Again, we're still adding more nutrients, and we are also making that soil deeper, thicker, better for bigger plants to grow. So now, once the pines and shallow-rooted trees have moved in and they've pushed out the grasses and the shrubs and the taller plants and things, the next thing that's going to move in are these shade-tolerant trees, like broadleaf and hardwood trees like oaks and hickory and maples and those big hardwood trees. And they're going to move into the area, replacing those pines and those shallow-rooted trees. So at this point, we are here. And what we have at that point is called the climax community. So we've got this climax community, this community that is stable and not doing much changing. So this was the first type of succession. So this was primary succession. So we have two more types of succession to discuss. So the first of those is secondary succession. So secondary succession is going to be a little bit different from primary succession because secondary succession happens in places where an existing ecosystem has been disturbed or destroyed. So things like deforestation or fire or things like that are going to wipe out the ecosystem itself, but the ecosystem is still going to have soil. So we don't have to form soil in secondary succession. We already have that layer of soil. So things are already able to grow in this area. So there was an ecosystem here, it's been disturbed or destroyed. That's where secondary succession happens. Now, secondary succession is going to happen a lot like primary succession, except that we don't have to do that whole soil building part. So the first step is that ferns and other small plants are going to start to grow. So you've got those little bitty guys that are going to start to grow first. And those are going to be the pioneer species again. Once the ferns and other small plants start to grow and they make the soil, they've kind of colonized the area, we're going to have the next group move in. And the next group is going to be, again, the grasses and the other non-woody plants. So those are going to be, again, your weeds and your wildflowers and things like that. So those are the second things to move in. The third thing, again, is going to be those taller plants and the shrubs. And they're going to shade those grasses, and those grasses are going to disappear. So once we've got those taller plants and shrubs growing, and they're going to kind of push out the grasses and those other non-woody plants, then you're going to end up with pines and shallow-rooted trees moving in again. So they're again going to shade the taller plants and the shrubs, and the taller plants and the shrubs are going to start to disappear. So we are right in this area of the process down here. And then finally, we're going to have those hardwood trees again, those broadleaf and hardwood trees like oaks and maples and hickory and all of that kind of stuff. Those are going to move in, eventually replacing the pine and the shallow-rooted trees. And at that point, once again, you've reached that climax community. So we're in this spot. So we've got these nice, mature forests, hardwood forests that are going to grow in the area. So this is secondary succession. So we have one more type of succession left to talk about. And the third one is going to be a lot different than these other two because it's not going to be on land. It's going to start in water. And so that one, the third type of succession, is aquatic succession. So aquatic succession is succession that happens in lakes and ponds and areas like that. So the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to have like a glacier or something retreat and form this lake or pond. The lake or pond that's formed isn't going to have very many nutrients in it, and it's not going to have very many organisms in it. So very little life in that lake or pond. Then you're going to have reeds and water plants that start to be able to grow in the water. And so they're going to, as they grow and then they die and they decay, they're going to add some nutrients to the water and then also provide food for some things for animals and things to eat. So we've got these reeds and water plants that start to grow. As they die and the animals that eat them die and other things happen, you're going to end up with soil building up in the bottom of your lake or pond. So happens through sediments being carried in by runoff. Again, the decaying organisms forming the soil, and the soil is going to build up. And you can see, so we've got here, it was a nice open, deep lake. Now we've got that soil building up. We've got plants growing in there. And so we've got all of this buildup here. And eventually you're just going to be left with a little bitty wetland spot, like a marsh or a swamp or a slough, whatever you want to call it. So just a little bit of wet soil, basically, or a little teeny tiny bit of water in it. Eventually, the whole area is going to fill with soil. All the water and wet soil is going to be gone. And then you're going to have the land plants that colonize the area too. And they're going to follow that same order as in secondary succession. So you're going to, once we get soil completely filled in there, you're going to have those ferns and small plants that grow, and then the grasses, and then the shrubs, and then the pines, and then the hardwoods, and the area is eventually going to become a forest. And when we get to that point again, we've reached that climax community. So that hardwood forest develops. And so you end up with this community that's not changing very much. And so those are the three types of succession.